Welcome to BrainStorm 9000.
Hello, Internet, and welcome to the world of BrainStorm 9000. This is a podcast that you're currently listening to.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I'm not listening to anything right now.
You're listening to yourself.
Because my name is Dr. Schultz, and I keep my brain wide open.
Yes, you do. You surely do.
We have a very important and interesting guest with us today.
Yes, we do. So, for those of you who don't know, I am Master McMaster, and today we get to talk to Hilary Jacobs Hendel about her experience in psychotherapy and her very cool theory and her book, It's Not Always Depression. And I want to read the subtitle because I love it so much. Working the Change Triangle to listen to the body, discover core emotions, and connect with your authentic self. So welcome, Hilary. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into psychotherapy?
Sure. Thank you both for having me here.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's great.
Your book is very interesting.
Thank you so much. It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Just the short introduction is I was born and raised in Manhattan and raised by very psychologically oriented parents. Decided after a few different careers to go back to school to become a psychotherapist. And now I am trained as a psychoanalyst. But I discovered along the way in my training this new theory that focused on emotions that made so much sense, and I had an extensive background in science. I was a science nerd for most of my life, and my first career was as a dentist, and at first I thought leaving dentistry was going to be a big wash, but it turns out that all that medical education that I had at dental school really, I think, allowed me to see this triangle that I write about and turn it into a book as a public health tool, because it was an academic concept that I pulled from the literature and saw it as a practical tool.
It's a very big turnaround because when I go to a dentist, they usually talk with my mouth open, with instruments in there I can't answer. And so that's what you used to do. And now you are a psychologist.
Yes.
So you sit back and listen.
Yeah.
And your clients talk. So it's a 180-degree change.
I personally, side note, I just love your story. I find it so inspiring because I always get so anxious about what am I going to do? What if I need to make a change later? And so I find your personal story very inspiring. And there's more details about that in the book if you'd like to learn more about Hilary's background.
Yes, and you can. Our parents kind of teach us it's supposed to be a straight line, but in many cases it's quite a crooked line. And so I went back to social work school. I'm not a psychologist, by the way. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I guess you could call me a psychoanalyst. But I went back to school at 39 for my master's.
Wow.
That's a long way away for you.
So you have a master's in psychology.
It's a master's in social work. It's the master's in social work and the PhD in psychology and the MD in psychiatry are the three ways to become a license to do psychotherapy.
Right.
So
and then you went to a psychoanalytic institute, or
yes.
where? Because there are two places in New York.
Yes, I went to ICP.
ICP.
Yeah, and for 4 years, and read the whole history of analytic thought, which was fabulous.
And so the theory that you got so excited about that this book is based on, accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy.
Yeah, and that emphasis on experiential is really, for the psychoanalysts listening out there, that's the big shift from listening to content and making interpretations to helping the person in front of me have an experience, and that experience should be a good one. That's an important piece of it too. Not a re-traumatizing one, but a good experience. That promotes transformation of some sort.
AEDP.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this theory?
Yes. In a nutshell, AEDP is derived from psychoanalysis, and there was a whole movement to make it shorter, and that gave birth to the short-term dynamic psychotherapies, of which Habib Davanloo was a major contributor, and Diana Fosha was a student of Davanloo's and took his theory where what you did in the room is you tried to create a crisis, like an intrapsychic crisis, to bust through the defenses to help people express emotions. There was already a growing movement that if you get in touch with emotions, people feel better.
You know, it's funny you say that because I'm fully trained in his approach.
Really?
I'm fully trained in brief adaptive psychotherapy, created by Davin Liu. The name sounds strange, he was Canadian. And I trained with two flagships of brief adaptive psychotherapy, Dr. Winston and Dr. Bean.
Oh. But
So-
Dr. Schultz, you're a psychiatrist. Don't you just write prescriptions for pills all day?
I specifically chose a program at Beth Israel Medical Center so I could study inside of the program brief adaptive psychotherapy. And the way they trained us was very intense, and it requires a lot from both the therapist and the client. It's
Yes.
very interpersonal. The theory is that everything that happens inside of the room, they call it a box, that's how you live your life. Mm-hmm. But yours is, I'm hoping, easier on both the therapist.
Yes.
So can you tell us
So
more?
what Diana Fosha did, who was the developer of this, who was just a wonderful person and a genius, is she also felt it was too combative.
Yes.
And realized that you could pressure defenses using empathy, and that's what we call it in ADP, that you pressure with empathy. So by creating a very safe connection and based on attachment theory, really helping somebody feel safe and appreciated, we actively affirm, we explicitly draw attention to the connection, then together we can look at what the defenses are doing, the cost and the gains, because defenses, which I define as anything that we do to avoid feeling emotional discomfort. And it can be a behavior, and it can be a thought process, and it can be another emotion even. But we do this as children and throughout our lives when we are overwhelmed by too much feeling, and there's too much aloneness with that feeling. So we can't cope, we can't move through it, and we have to block it and move into defensive ways of living. And as children, that's a good thing because it helps us get through. But as adults, those defenses get in the way of being our authentic selves, authentic living, connection, good relationships, good satisfaction in work. And so what we want to do is loosen up those defenses so that we can help somebody get in contact with their core experiences of who they are and what they feel. And through that process, they move into this much calmer, more connected, open-hearted state that I talk about in the book, where all these good things happen. The mind calms down. We feel more clear in thought, more connected to others and to ourselves, more compassionate to ourselves and others, more creative.
The C's.
Yes, all those C's. All the C's, which I borrowed from another great practitioner, Richard Schwartz, who developed something called Internal Family Systems Therapy, IFS, which is also a great, IFS and AEDP work very well together to do a really good psychotherapy treatment.
Oh, wonderful. And you just mentioned pretty much, I think you covered all the different corners and directions of the change triangle. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So this is something on the very first day that, the way I came across AEDP is I was about to enter into psychoanalytic training, and a friend of mine mentioned this woman, Diana Fosha, and thought that I would be interested in her work. So I found out where she was going to be, and there was an attachment and emotion conference in New York City with 3 other famous researchers and clinicians, Dan Siegel, Tom Stern, and Jude Cassidy. And when Diana Fosha did her presentation, she put this triangle up that was also, you must have seen in your work with Davin Liu, that David Mallon first put in a book. And as soon as I saw this triangle, which is basically an inverted triangle, it's upside down, and I'll explain why it's upside down. And the 3 corners of the triangle, the bottom is core emotions, these biologically wired core survival emotions that Charles Darwin wrote about at the turn of the century. And the top of the triangle, the 2 corners, are these things called inhibitory emotions, which are there to block our core emotions in service of getting along with others.
I'm personally very familiar with those ones.
So am I. I think most people relate. So, and I won't keep listeners in suspense. The inhibitory emotions are anxiety, guilt, and shame.
Ding, ding, ding.
Exactly. And the core emotions are sadness, fear, anger, disgust, joy, excitement, and sexual excitement. There are some people who are emotion research that would add seeking impulse to that and other emotions like love. But for the purposes of this book, which is a self-help book for the general public, because I had a growing pet peeve that turned into an outrage that people don't get any emotion education in our early schooling, like in high school biology.
Yeah, seriously.
And it would be good, and it helped me so much. So back to this conference, I saw this triangle, and I immediately felt organized in a new way. I had struggled with anxiety and at various times depression my whole life, and all of a sudden I saw this triangle, and everything fell into place and made sense. And at the time, I thought, boy, it would have been, everybody should know this. I was curious why, with all my education, I had never seen it before. So I went on to study AEDP because I was so turned on by what I had seen. And Diana Fosha had, in this way of working, they videotape through supervision. So I was actually watching real sessions.
Oh, wow.
Like Davinlu does
Yeah,
as
I
well.
had the same thing.
Yeah.
It's actually very challenging because at that time there was a huge video camera with a huge recorder in the corner somewhere.
Very intimidating.
Yeah.
And then you sit down with your supervisor. Right?
Yeah,
And
it's
listen.
intense.
Yes.
Exactly. But you really do learn really
Yes,
well that way.
yes.
So I began to study psychoanalysis at the same time I was studying AEDP, which was hard. I had to take breaks in AEDP because I couldn't figure out how to integrate them yet. Now I can, and now I can explain to my supervisees how to do that. But that's the change triangle, and the reason it's so important to get down to core emotions is underneath the change triangle. It's off the triangle, but it's below it is this open-hearted state, which biologically we're talking about neuroregulation, that the mind and the body is regulated, meaning it's in a balanced state. For those of you who are chemists out there, we're in homeostasis.
Yes.
And when we are in a balanced state, we have access to all these C's that we mentioned before. We're calm, connected, and so on.
I want them. I
Yes.
want the C's.
Yes.
Yes, and for any other visually inclined people like myself, for instance, you can find an illustration of the change triangle and how it leads to the open-hearted state it'll be on our Instagram and our Twitter, which is BrainStorm9000, and it'll also be on our website, brainstorm9000.com.
That's fabulous. And there's also a lot more on my website as well.
Oh yeah, do you want to plug your website?
What
Yeah,
is your
no,
website?
just to let people know, it's really, there's free resources if you don't want to buy the book, although the book is in the libraries too. But this book was a labor of love to really just give like an emotion education that's simple, easy to read, and kind of in a box, like here it is. And so I have a blog and on the website, which is either you could Google the change triangle or go to Hilary Jacobs Hendel.com, and there's pictures of the change triangle. You can download it and print it out, and emotion words, there's a bunch of stuff on there.
Yeah.
Either place, but it's good. If anyone can do that as we're talking, it would probably help.
Yeah, definitely. It helps to follow along.
Yeah.
I need to visualize everything or
Yeah.
see it personally.
Yeah, exactly. And even this might help more is if you see the change triangle, or if you imagine a triangle, you really want to imagine it superimposed on your body, and the point of the triangle is somewhere around your belly button, and that's because core emotions are really body-based sensations that we come to recognize and label as an emotion, that most people think they feel it in their mind, but they don't. They're physical sensations that we learn through our parents when things are going well to recognize emotions. And some people don't learn that when their parents can't do that. And then the top of the triangle kind of comes up, and you can imagine it sitting, kind of around your head, a little bit above your shoulders. Because when we disconnect from our emotions, we typically go up in our minds. In this culture, we're taught to kind of live in our head, and then we feel too much in our head, and it creates anxiety and problems of its own.
That is very relatable, I have to say.
For example, when people practice Tai Chi, which is an ancient Chinese, kind of like the mother of all the martial arts, central attention is paid to the point that you just indicated to us, actually a little bit below. And they constantly teach you to center around this area.
Yeah.
So apparently the ancients knew a little bit about how important your body is.
So they were onto something.
They knew a
Right.
lot.
Well,
We could take a couple lessons, I think, from Eastern medicine.
Yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
if we had any access to it, yes, that would be nice.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so now that we have an idea of what the change triangle is, and you've talked a little bit about the importance of working the change triangle, right? Which is going from corner to corner, trying to get to that bottom where you can eventually get through to the core emotions, right?
Exactly.
What is it about this that you think is so, like, powerful or effective or valuable?
Oh, there's like so many reasons.
Yeah.
Well, if the goal is to feel calm and clear in thought, and as we say in AEDP, you know, the sort of height of mental health is to be able to feel, deal with life, and relate all at the same time, which I kind of
Wouldn't know what that's like, but that sounds great.
I bet you do, Jane. But yes, to feel, deal, and relate. And, you know, again, who doesn't want to spend more time feeling calm and clear
Oh, I can
and
name
confident?
a few. Well, I know quite a few people who come to my office. For example, anybody who works in finance in New York, they are busy 105 hours a week. There is no time for them to feel or deal.
Yeah. And they probably worry that if they calm down, they won't make as much money.
Exactly.
A lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
And that may be true to a certain extent, but they may feel a little happier, a little more connected.
If they've only known.
Yeah. Well, you'll tell them. So if we know that we, you know, for those, let me qualify, for those who want to spend more time feeling calm and connected and confident and clear, and the question is, how do we get there? And there are different schools of thought, right? All the psychotherapies are trying to help people feel better. So that's what we're talking about. And this, you know, having studied not only psychoanalysis, but CBT and
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
exactly, and EMDR. I mean, I just read voraciously when I was studying the triangle, and this model really seems to me to make the most sense and to work the best. And we can practice this. So the idea is that, you know, at any moment of the day, we can look at this triangle and identify ourselves on either one of the three corners or below in the open-hearted state. And we can, the goal is to work clockwise. So we want to move from defensive states down to core emotions, and we want to move from anxiety, guilt, and shame down to core emotions. And then that we don't need the defenses, and anxiety, guilt, and shame diminishes because they're also acting in some way defensively as well.
I love the way that you put these ideas together in general. It really spoke to me because as someone who has anxiety and also feels the shame and guilt that comes along with all those fun things, I never really thought of them as like a different category of emotions. It's always just been like a state for me, similar to like happiness could be like a mental state. Like anxiety is just my go-to mental state. But I love this way that you talk about it because it kind of reminds you that it's not like a permanent state. It's not like, you know, a resting state. It's something that you do to react to something that's happening. But then if you get down to the real emotion that some experience or some situation is triggering, then you can let go of those inhibitory emotions and defenses.
Exactly. And what I like to say is that, you know, your anxiety has meaning. And it's the beginning of a story, just like any of the symptoms that we all suffer as human beings. And as people who come into my office, the symptoms have meaning. They're there for a reason, and we need to listen to them. And then once we understand them and what purpose they're serving, then we want to serve that same type of purpose, really coming from more the authentic self, where you can assert your needs, set limits and boundaries, know what you like and what you don't like, so that you don't need to be triggered and jarred into anxiety and guilt and shame, everything just quiets down, and you can just lead from much more of a self-possessed state.
Yeah.
And we're really talking about to use your talking about states, there are many ways that we can change our state. And from exercising, from taking a hot shower, sex, drugs, all those things. And the change triangle is it's a state changer. It's one of those state changers, but it's also something we can work during the day. But if we work it over a lifetime, we're going to end up spending more and more time in the open-hearted state. We're going to sort of process a lot of our traumas and integrate our brain, and all sorts of good things happen. The brain and body come into synergy.
Yeah.
One of the members of our team likes to play the devil's advocate. It's usually Master McMaster, but today, again, I'm going to take up this role and ask you this, which comes up very frequently.
Yeah.
It's all very nice and sounds very exciting, but what do I do, says someone, when I hate my boss? They make me very anxious. I hate my job, and my family life sucks, and it also makes me very anxious and angry. So how do I achieve your therapeutic nirvana? Do I need to get rid of all these things? Quit my job? Leave my family? What say you?
Very good question, right? So there's, I'll try to give a quick answer.
No, take all the time you need.
Okay. So what we need to understand is how much is the past of the person affecting their present day life. People that have had a lot of trauma and a lot of adversity, and these things called ACEs that people are talking about now, which stand for adverse events of childhood or adverse childhood events. These things that used to go unrecognized, but I would call them invisible traumas. That this all builds up over time and makes a person more susceptible to being triggered into anxiety and misery. So the first thing is to help them process as much of the past as they can, and to recognize what in the situation can be changed and what can't. There are many people that can't leave their jobs even though they hate them because they don't have the financial means, and there are people that want to stay in relationships. And then what I invite them to do in my office, so now we're talking about therapy as opposed to self-help,
Right.
is to make room for the emotions, to process the anger that comes up with being stuck, and to try to release the energy so that the person can, one, feel calmer in general, and give them tools that they can take out into the world. So if you're being insulted by a present-day insult, like a boss, and there isn't a lot of old triggering that's happening, I use a lot of fantasy or ways to get it out. So you can imagine if your boss is having a particularly bad day with you, I help people figure out how to discharge the energy. Maybe one, you have to learn to understand and experience your emotions. So if we're talking about anger, working with someone, I would help them, one, be able to name that they're feeling angry. So even just being at work and saying to yourself, I am so angry now, helps calm the mind and body. It has to do with left and right brain. Putting language on experience. Then being able to tolerate the physical experience, stay in your body to notice, where is this anger? So a lot of people experience anger as like an energy starting from kind of that center in their stomach that rushes up. And to be able to follow that impulse, to see what it wants to do if it could do something. Not as a dress rehearsal, because we don't want people to get fired or to cause destruction, but to begin to use fantasy like, punching their boss in the face. Again, not as a dress rehearsal for real life. Right. And I make that very, very clear. But you can imagine doing something, and again, the brain does not know the difference between fantasy and reality at times, and you can use those attributes of the brain and the mind to kind of trick emotions into releasing that, and
To work through it.
to work through it.
Yeah.
You can do all sorts of other things, like for people that get furious at their partners. I say, take out your memo pad on your phone and just start writing from the anger. Feel the anger in your body. And oftentimes we have to work and put aside any guilt, any shame that comes up, because people really struggle with anger in our culture. But once you free up that experience, then you can write, that bleep and bleep and bleep and bleep, I want to kill it, bleep and bleep and bleep, and just getting it out, and keep getting it out, and keep getting it out, and the body will start to calm down. You'll check back in, and there's a whole process for just listening to the body.
Yeah.
And letting these feelings release.
So this is this sounds like the part of the book where you talk about the importance of staying with an emotion and really feeling it, and to pay attention about how your body's reacting and how your body feels when you are feeling a certain emotion, or when a certain emotion is triggered or blocked or something. Am I right?
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Great. And so I'm curious, what about the physical experience of these emotions is so helpful to kind of breaking through the mental experience of it?
Yeah, for a number of reasons. One, we have to be with the physical. It's being with the physical sensation of emotions and being able to tolerate that experience and stay with it. Noticing and following it like you're riding a wave is the closest thing to the experience. I like to use an analogy of when you stub your toe and you wait for the pain, and it's going to rise and crescendo, and then it's going to abate, feel better. So it is when you stay with the experience of an emotion, it's going to rise, crescendo, and fall. And I help people do this for themselves. Initially, it's in session. And some people can do this, again, if they have a meditation practice, or if there wasn't too much trauma and adversity in their lives, they can do this with self-help. Because the book can be used on a number of levels. It's an intellectual tool just to know and feel organized, and then you can do the exercises in the book and start to practice how to get in touch with emotions. And then I show all the stories to show you what it looks like in therapy, so you don't have to be so frightened of it, and it demystifies emotions, and you go as far as you can on your own, and then if you get stuck, you can get help. It doesn't even have to be a therapist. I believe people can learn to just witness each other's feelings and create a safe space in peer groups or with your partner or a good friend, and maybe read the book together or do things like that where both people are aware of how to create safety to do that.
So am I hearing you correctly that if somebody's childhood was very eventful, so to speak, and they had a lot of trauma, whether
big T and little t,
right,
Exactly.
either recognized by them or not, then it needs to be worked in this direction, because it's going to keep kind of predisposing them to being triggered all the time.
Exactly.
Each time they come across a similar experience.
Yes.
I believe the way Hilary talked about it in her book was neurons that fire together wire together.
Exactly.
I love
exactly. Yes, it's a great quote.
It's a quote, yes.
Yeah. It's not original by any means.
No, yeah.
But right, that helps understand how that we're wired in our childhood. All our experiences wire us, and particularly the emotional ones, and particularly the bad emotional ones, which makes sense that the brain wants to remember bad things that happened that made us feel terrible, so we don't do that again.
Stupid brain. Or I guess smart brain.
Yes, right, depending on exactly.
Well, another Devil's Advocate episode from Dr. Schultz.
Give it to me.
I met a number of people who are extremely successful, and it begins to look to me as though each and every one of them, including people I read about, had an extremely dramatic, close to a disastrous experience in their childhood. So extremely successful people. Like, for example, I met a person who was held at the gunpoint together with the mother in their house. And it's a relentless person,
Oof.
a real go-getter, really successful, an extremely interesting person in public. In personal life, probably not so. So is there any connection between severe childhood trauma and this crazy drive that some people have? Or am I making it totally up?
No, I mean, I think it's definitely, something. First of all, I don't have the answer, but it makes sense. If you theoretically, if you survive adversity, it means you are very resilient, and you build confidence from surviving adversity. There are people who are highly traumatized that they don't have that resilience, and for whatever reason, right, the combination of genetics and experience, they really fold. And then there are some people that I totally know what you're saying, that they have so much. First thing I'm thinking of people that survived the Holocaust and went on to do incredible things, and they were inspired as opposed to done in.
Yes. So then one wonders, is there such a thing as perfect childhood
I would love to know the answer to this.
and perfect parents?
Partially because, my mental health issues are no secret to our listeners, and childhood stuff is real, and I also really want to become a parent one day, so I think about this all the time. Like, is it possible to not screw up your kids?
I think it is not. That is not possible.
I
And
agree.
I think that just surviving our childhood creates, you can call it trauma. It creates neural networks that cause us stress and anxiety. It's just part of being human. I think it was it Winnicott that said you had to be good enough, not
Right.
perfect. And most parents, I believe, have good intent. They think they have, so I want to say most parents have good intent, and even in sessions I never talk about, most people don't want to blame their parents, but I talk about who's the responsible party. So the parent is responsible for what they do and their behavior and their bad behavior, and hopefully would correct it, but many we know don't, that they don't have the capacity to see themselves. Much easier to see others than ourselves.
Yes, this is
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
There are so many things I blame myself for when my children were growing up. And then when they grew up significantly, I asked them a couple of times. They don't remember.
Really?
It doesn't mean it didn't affect them, but I
Right.
thought that they're keeping the grudges for me being critical about something and stuff like that. They say they absolutely don't remember, but they remember that, right?
Of
Something I
course.
don't remember.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. There are so
Right.
many things. I wish I had had this book that I wrote. I think maybe in part
Right.
that inspired me when I was younger, and I was a young mother, and I had a good mother, a really good mother, and I tried to emulate that, but I didn't understand really that. When I didn't understand shame is such an important emotion that we should all be educated about, because
Yes.
everybody has shame, but it's created in a context. And when we try so hard to help our children by shaping them, so it's like, if you do this, you will be okay. No, you really have to see your child and follow them and make them feel good about who they are
Right.
for the things that they cannot change, whether they're not such a great student or not such a great athlete, or whether they're gay or transgender, or anything. If they don't want to go to college, just have to understand, and not. I think parents need to sort of sit back, learn how to calm their own emotions,
Yeah.
so that they can think clearly and not get riled up, because that's what happened. Everybody gets anxious and then speeds up, and then it's not a thoughtful process when things are starting, when problems come up, which they always do. Raising children is the hardest thing.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you. I have a few clients in my practice who kind of like came out as gay, but they are unable to have fulfilling gay relationships. And some of them say they never had gay sex because they still have their parents sitting inside of their head and telling them that it's shameful and that what have I done to have such a child and stuff like that. Even in some cases, it's not even physical parents, it's the environment of the entire town where they go periodically to visit, to remain unnamed, of course, where it's just plainly unacceptable.
Yeah.
So they feel ashamed all the time.
Yeah, right. Because the family can create shame, the peer group can create shame.
Of course.
The churches and synagogues and mosques
Right.
and all the different society and cultures, all the shoulds, how you're supposed to be.
Right.
And but AEDP and these experiential therapies are pretty good with trying to rework those. Again, those are child parts, those are shamed parts that have to be separated out. That's what we do when someone talks about something, like, can you get some distance from that part of you that holds shame and try to connect to it and be there for it so that it's not alone in its shame.
Yeah, this is something I wanted to kind of follow up on what you were talking about with what parenting should or shouldn't be. And it sounds kind of like the part of your book where you talk about, like, parenting yourself and, like, the role of the caretaker, which is where you're meant to be there not to, like, control someone's emotional reaction, but to, like, support them.
Exactly. Yes.
So I have a very good example from my own professional life. So I was studying this brief adaptive psychotherapy, and I had an amazing, older, experienced supervisor. I actually went all the way to get him. I initially was assigned a different person. So after one or two training sessions, I sat down with him during the supervision and told him, you know what, I don't think I can be a good psychotherapist. He said, why? I mean, you're not supposed to say why, so he said probably something, how come you say that, or something like that. And I told him, look, I have a very loud, strong personality. Due to my accent, I might sound quite abrasive. I'm judgmental, and I don't think a psychotherapist should be like that. He said, you know, Ed, I don't think it's important. What's important for you is to be aware of how you are and use yourself as an instrument. So time goes by, and about 3 days, I receive a postcard at my house from him with a picture of one of the Russian, like, sceneries that have to do with the famous Russian poet Pushkin, who is like Shakespeare in English, and it says, Ed, be like Pushkin. So I come back to the supervision and I say, you sent this amazing postcard to me. What does it mean? He said, Pushkin always was himself, it's true. He was quite a character. So I wanted to tell you, just be like Pushkin, be yourself.
Right.
It was an amazing, basically,
Yes.
parenting advice.
It's permission to be you.
To be me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So huge.
I
right,
don't
to
know
hear
whether it
something.
was a mistake or not.
Right. Well, you're going to have the patients, the goodness of
Right.
it. They're going to, the ones who need you
Right.
are going to
Of
stay
course.
with you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of
And
course.
Yeah.
actually, that's a perfect transition to one of my other burning questions, which is this idea of the authentic self. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Yes, and it really goes back to those C's. Like, how can you tell if you're in your authentic self?
So the open-hearted state is your authentic self.
Yeah, I mean, and again, these are all words to describe really a sense of being connected, right? So we're using these C words for people that feel lost, that didn't really have an experience growing up of authenticity because they had to be so protective and so guarded. That the C's are a great sort of initial way. You can ask yourself, and you can even shift into them. Sometimes that one is able to do that as an automatic state changer. But in a given moment, let's say even before I see my children that are adults now, I will check in with myself and make sure that I am as close to in that authentic state as I can be, so that I can think and feel and deal all at the same time. So I'll check in, am I calm? And you don't have to be calm. So in other words, at this point, doing this type of work so long and having all the therapy that I've had, I can be in connection with my authentic self, right? So that idea is that the authentic self is very grounded, wise, and can relate to the other parts of us that are being triggered. So I may recognize that I'm frightened. I may recognize that I feel like being judgmental. I may recognize a whole host of other states, child parts of mine, or feelings, but I'm in command where I recognize them, I have compassion, and I can validate them, but I'm leading with kindness, compassion, that type of unanxious way of being that when you're with someone like that, with confidence, thoughtfulness, and I'm not acting out from these parts, and I'm not acting on my feelings.
Right, like, so you're not letting yourself, like, become overcome by one of those emotions. Is that why I remember in one of the anecdotes that you were talking about, you had one of your clients ascribe one of their emotions, like their anger, I think it was, to, like, a childhood version of themselves. Mm-hmm. So does that kind of, like, help create the, like, otherness? Like, this doesn't have to be all of you. This is just, Yes.
No, and you're right. And it's not all of you. Any type of experience we have. Sometimes the anger is originating from a child part. It's the patient that will tell me if it's a young part or a present day part.
Yeah.
So I'm not telling them anything. It's just amazing when you just make room for experience, that the body and the mind knows what to do to heal. So if someone is telling me they're having an emotion, the way that I would do that is by asking if they can get a little bit of distance from that emotion or that state or that feeling, and almost invite them, if they can, and this is hard work and mental energy, to imagine that part of themselves sitting on the sofa with us. And then the instruction would be, can you try to see through your present day most calm and confident eyes that part of you, and will it take shape? And very often an image comes up, and very often it is a younger part from childhood or teenage years or young adult years, or it could be the present day self. And then we work with it together, we meaning me and the patient, accordingly. And it's often a creative process to see. We ask the part what it needs, what purpose it's serving, why it's here now, and parts will say, will talk to us.
Yeah, and a lot of this self-reflection, checking in with yourself, and especially this open-hearted state, which I believe I have a complete list of all the C's for any of our listeners who are interested. It is calm, curious, connected, confident, courageous, and clear. There are some details in there.
Yeah.
But so all of this reminds me a lot of, mindfulness and meditation. Dr. Schultz knows a lot about this. Do you agree?
Mindfulness, absolutely. If we only could be mindful at least 10% of the time.
Yeah. Makes a big difference.
I have a really hard time with especially when you talk about really being with your emotions and like seeing them through, and being in touch with yourself. I feel like that's a really big part of mindfulness is, being fully in the present instead of going off to hide in your headspace.
You know what? Not that I know that I'm absolutely right, but it seems to me that one of the factors that is lacking more and more is an opportunity to learn from your family, let's say, harmonious, proper behavioral for your own self. Like, for example, if you grew up in a large nuclear family, which right now does not exist, very frequently people have a single parent or two parents, period, nobody else. It would be nice if they could learn the respect that everybody wants, but very few people give to other people. If they learn to process their emotions before they spit them out at other people, right? So
yes.
all this,
that's what we're talking about here.
in some cultures still are, And that's what used to be a part of the culture. Before this organic to us technological evolution, when we are becoming, on one hand, more connected, texting and going on the internet, and on the other hand, significantly more disconnected from each other, especially when it comes to growing up. Like right now, to shut somebody up, a parent would give an iPhone, a pad, would put them in front of TV, and before they would talk and experience together.
Yeah, and now, like, if I feel anxious, like when I was a kid, or, you know, if I were 29, let's say 50 years ago, I would probably have to sit there and do some thinking, but now I can turn on Netflix and I can binge watch, and then I don't have to think about anything.
That's right, and you're on the defensive. That's the defense corner of the change triangle, right? Which isn't all bad, but you want to have the flexibility that to come back to whatever emotions, which really means coming into the body and listening to what's going on and what the meaning and everything is there for a reason. Yeah, so I agree. It's tragic.
Tragic. So having, well, it's yet another stage of our evolution, or whatever is the opposite.
The devolution. The other problem I thought you were going to allude to is this idea of on the internet where nobody is accountable for what they say, and so people are discharging anger, as I would say, saying mean things to other people. And that's one of the reasons why I think emotion education maybe could help change the trajectory, because if we understand that when you say something mean to someone, it has an effect because of these mirror neurons and the way that we're wired. Humans are wired for connection, and when you cause someone to feel pain, then they have to bury it and create shame and defenses, and we're really furthering a world that is not such a great world. The other thing that people don't really understand is that there's a difference between experiencing an emotion, which is a wholly internal experience. Like, if I'm experiencing my anger, I'm not doing or saying anything to anybody. I'm with it with myself. And what acting out is when you express that anger without being mindful of the effect it's going to have on somebody else, like like what happens all the time in social media. And so people need to understand the difference between experiencing an emotion and acting out, so that we behave more kindly to each other, even if we disagree. That there's kind ways to talk about our conflicts, and nobody gets those skills. Just like parents don't get a manual with any of this, and a basic emotion education, I think, has great power, and it's not available. It stays, all this stuff stays within a very small group of researchers like Antonio Damasio and all these people are researching. It does not translate. I think we have an emotion-phobic culture, and so it's even been difficult to get publicity in some ways for the book, because I think people don't understand emotions, so it's like a vicious circle where you want to keep your distance from emotions. People think emotions equal destruction and bad behavior, and it's really not that way. So it's like, how do you although it's changing with trauma-informed treatment and social emotional learning that's starting to happen in early childhood, where you're giving kids some skills to deal with stress and anxiety, which is problematic, and we have an epidemic of anxiety and depression and addiction in our culture, and I think it all has to do with being disconnected from feelings and disconnected from each other.
I certainly hope that our podcast, for whatever it's worth, is going to help to promote your book and this amazing approach.
Yeah, and to help people. I think one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you today, Hilary, and to talk about this book and this theory, is so that other people can get an idea of a way that they can help themselves to grow and to cope with their own emotions, because we all deal with mental health issues at one point or another. We all have our brain health issues, and it shouldn't be something that you're ashamed of, and I think that things like this can be really helpful.
Unless you are a person who is not taking off your backpack while in the same elevator with me or in a subway
This is a
station.
pressing issue, and Hilary, I think we would like your opinion
Yes,
as well.
I'm on a quest against people who don't take off their backpacks. I just had one on the way here who pushed me with the backpack on the elevator.
I see. It gets in the way. Yeah. Did you slug him? Did you act out your anger, or did you experience it?
No, when somebody pushed me, I say, with a Russian accent, and then I turn around. I'm 6'3", looking angry, so it kind of like solves the...
Yeah, that does solve the problem.
I don't
have that ability.
I mean, it's a joke. I don't feel angry about it. It's just, it's so
I
inconsiderate.
do. I mean, not necessarily about the backpacks, but the people who stand in the doorway and just so that people can only come in and out of the train single file instead of stepping aside. I feel a lot of anger, and I wouldn't say that I really feel it. I stew in it. Mm-hmm. So the next time I come across that on the subway, which will undoubtedly be on my commute home tonight, I should take a moment to get in touch with myself and really feel that.
Like, all joking aside, that would be a great time
to
just dip into your body and just try to name some of the sensations that let you know that you're angry.
Yeah.
And to breathe deeply, and even to let yourself notice what the impulse is. Like, do you want to punch him, or do you want to stab him, or do you want to kick him? Like, again, not a dress rehearsal, but to begin to listen to the impulse with curiosity and compassion, and just validate it, that it's anger, it's a biologically wired program that's there for a reason. You were, in essence, insulted or attacked, whatever it was felt, and that's the natural response. You just want to be able not to stew in it, but to move through it so you can go and have a good evening.
To pass through it to get to your authentic self.
Exactly.
I love it.
And that I just want to say one thing. There is no nirvana here. That this is real life, and this is a tool that helps, and we need all the tools. I kind of call it mindfulness with a map, because it really is.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
Yeah, thanks.
So maybe on this positive note, we should repeat the name of the book. And of course, we are going to feature it on our website.
Yes, the name of the book is It's Not Always Depression. And of course, this will be on our website and also on our social medias accounts. That's an abbreviation.
For social media.
And actually, just a final question for you, Hilary. Can you tell us, I'm very curious, why you chose to name the book It's Not Always Depression?
I'm kind of glad you asked that. The story, I didn't actually pick that title, but I like it. I wasn't really a writer until recently, and the reason what happened is I had studied this way of working, AEDP, and I had been working with people that with major depression that had not gotten well and had used other methods, many other methods. And then when this particular person that I wrote about for the New York Times came to me, I just didn't want to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, as they say, and I treated this person as a victim of childhood trauma and neglect, and he got better. And so I sent it into the New York Times. They had a column called Couch at the time, never thinking in a million years that I would get published in the New York Times, and they did publish it, and the article went viral, and it was James Ryerson, who was the editor, who called the piece It's Not Always Depression. And then Random House won because the article did so well. It was the #1 emailed article in the New York Times on that particular day.
Wow.
So, which just shows you how it resonates, because emotions are universal. Everybody is on the change triangle. So it's not a surprise. And Random House wanted to name it the same thing. And so people say, well, if it's not always depression, what is it? Mm-hmm. And it's life experiences and how they affect our emotional mind and body, and what we can do to help ourselves.
Yeah, and it's normal, and it doesn't, if you're having trouble, if you're struggling with anxiety or shame or guilt or any of these kinds of things, it doesn't mean that you're mentally ill, and you don't have to feel, have to feel ashamed of your shame.
That's exactly right. Everybody suffers. And if you don't suffer, then you love somebody that suffers. Mm-hmm. And if you're a parent, you need to understand emotions so you don't unwittingly create excessive amounts of shame and anxiety. Shame and anxiety are part of life, and they're a necessary part in small amounts to do what they're supposed to do, which is to civilize socialize us so that we can advance as a group. But when we have too much anxiety, too much shame, too much guilt, it just stops us in our tracks, and we can't expand and grow and explore the world safely. We're too much in our living in a defensive, protective mode.
Yeah.
To me, Master McMaster, and you are the pro on this subject, it sounds like we just experienced a eudaimonia moment.
I think almost this whole episode has been a eudaimonia moment. And for Hilary, if you're not familiar, and for any listeners who aren't yet familiar, our eudaimonia moment is the part of the podcast where we take something away from our discussion that can be used to contribute to our eudaimonia, which is the Greek word for human flourishing.
So we just had a eudaimonia episode.
Yes.
On this positive note, why don't we say our usual goodbye?
Yes, I believe Dr. Schultz would like to remind people to keep something open.
Keep your brains wide open.
Yes, thank you, Hilary, so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you so much.
All right. Farewell, Earthlings.
Bye-bye.
Until next time. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of BrainStorm 9000. If you like us, love us, or marginally tolerate us, hey, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever the hell you listen to your podcasts.